Hey, what's up? This is Nick with Motorcycle.com, and we just got done riding the brand new 2025 Triumph Tiger Sport 800. So let's get into it. So as you guys know, this is the brand's latest middleweight sport tour. It's a pretty exciting segment because we haven't seen a lot of action in this category until quite recently. The adventure class has really sort of usurped the sport tour as we know it, but things are coming back and manufacturers are getting back involved. And in the middleweight game, we have this guy. So what is this bike really? It kind of borrows some of that sport adventure touring, aesthetic and motif that we've seen popularized in the last couple of years, but really just leans into the fact that it's a standard sport tour with 17-inch wheels, offers some nice wind protection, also plenty of luggage options, they do not come standard, and allows you to just have a good all-around motorcycle, whether you're commuting, doing some touring, or sport riding. And sport riding is underscored pretty heavily once you get some seat time on this thing. We're here in Vila Moura, Portugal, just outside Faro, Portugal. Rode some canyon roads today, some stuff on the freeway. Got a little bit of everything that a sport touring rider would face. Got some rain, got some wind, got some sunny skies. Overall, this bike has been super solid. Okay, first things first, what you guys want to know about is the new engine. And it comes from the street side of the triple cylinder engine family from Triumph. Now, Triumph has really made their bones on triple cylinder engines. That's what they're known for, that's what they love. And frankly, they're just howling, screaming, fun-loving engines. Now, what they've really done here is evolve a new engine from the current 660, the 765 power plant. And although they've borrowed the architecture in many, many ways, and there are some similarities there, there's a whole lot of new in this engine. So of course, if you were to compare spec to spec, you're gonna see the same bore as a 765, but there's a significantly longer stroke, a couple of mils right there. So already we're getting the idea that they wanted to focus on torque. Now, of course, there's some other changes in there with that additional stroke length. You're gonna have new conrod, new pistons, new heads. The list goes on and on and on. For all intents and purposes, this is a brand new engine. There are very few related parts to the 765 engine or the 660 engine, save for some cases, the bottom end cases, things like that. The transmission is completely updated with new gearing, new gear ratios, and gearing that can sustain higher levels of torque and higher levels of performance in that regard. Now, overall, what you're getting is an engine that is really prioritizing torque, and really actually the marketing slogan that we see from Triumph or Yamaha, where they say a triple cylinder engine gives you the best of a parallel twin engine and an inline four. So you get the torque of a parallel twin engine and then the rev happy nature of an inline four. This thing really speaks to that because it makes significantly more torque than a 765. Now, it does sacrifice top end power, but in a street setting, you don't really need it. So talking pure numbers here, we're dealing with something like 113 horsepower and about 62 foot-pounds of torque, and it feels torquey. Off the line, it just has a lot more get up and go than the 765 street triple engines or the Daytona 660 engines or the Tiger Sport 660. So it just has a lot more punch, a lot more mid-range, and it will rev out. To that end, there is a little bit more inertial mass into some of these components, so it doesn't spin up quite as aggressively as a 765. It definitely is a motor that has its own unique characteristics. In a lot of ways, this engine I feel is actually better suited for street riding because you have more low end and mid-range power to just punch through when you're on the street, you're zipping through traffic. And actually when you start getting into the cans and having some fun, you just always have power on tap. What's really interesting is riding with this thing, you kind of feel inclined to just short shift it and let that torque do its work. But if you really want to, you can just get on the gas and rev it out and do its thing. Now, I mentioned before that the transmission is completely redone. Mainly that's to deal with the fact that we're dealing with higher torque figures than before. So they just beefed up the gearing. Of course, ratios are changed as well. You do get an up-down quick shifter as standard and true to Triumph fashion that we've seen with the 765 R and RS motorcycles. The quick shifter is a very, very solid unit. Now, we're kind of getting into the electronics talk, so let's go ahead and talk about that. You have a TFT display, LCD TFT display that is borrowed from some other Triumph models. It's on the 765R, Tiger Sport 660, a couple different models. Simple, approachable dash, fairly easy to read, no big complaints there. In comparison to the other TFT displays, I guess it could seem a little more simplistic, but Triumph is trying to keep the MSRP down here. Now, electronics-wise, you do have IMU supported electronics. So that means with your ride modes, road, rain, and sport, you're adjusting 3 different levels of traction control of the same name, of course. Throttle-wise, sport's gonna be your sportiest. There's really good actuation on the ride-by-wire throttle. And overall, it's just a very, very approachable machine, whether you're trying to ride it aggressively or just around town. Now, Triumph did mention that they put quite an effort into separating those ride modes and making them, distinct. And I think rain is kind of the one to talk about for a second here, because rain typically is a very dull, kind of dreary ride mode. Here, it's not. It just tapers and really activates those rider aids much earlier and in a much more fluid way than we'd expect before. It just doesn't come off as so kind of soggy and boring that you'd see in many other manufacturers or even older rain versions on Triumph motorcycles. Road mode is, as you'd like, kind of calm, collected, cool. And sport is where we ended up leaving it. And honestly, with the rain and stuff that we got, I ended up riding around in that mode a lot too. Now, kind of going to the chassis, we are seeing a bit being carried over from the Tiger Sport 660. Same perimeter steel frame. According to the engineers, they wanted to carry over that geometry. So the main changes that you will see when you're talking about rake, trail, wheelbase, etc., it's going to be a byproduct of just some subtle changes specific to this motorcycle. It does have a new swing arm unique to this motorcycle, but the frame, by and large, outside of a couple bracing points right in here to accept the engine, it is a carryover from that. It's a little bit more raked out, and that's primarily because of the suspension setup. We have a 41mm Showa fork with compression adjustment and rebound, a Showa shock with preload adjustment, remote preload adjustment, and rebound. Overall, suspension is quite good. You have 5.9 inches of travel front and rear. It does, again, lend itself to that sport ADV touring kind of thing. So it sits a little bit higher with a seat height of 32.8 something inches. But because Triumph really focuses on that accessible standover height with a scalloped seat and a narrow, slim seat to fuel tank section, it's not something that's cumbersome or overwhelming or just feels like it's on stilts. Handling wise, and speaking to the suspension, it gobbles up a lot of potholes nicely and handles really, really well. I mean, you can push this thing to the point where if you're riding a naked bike like a 765 RS, it sort of begs the question, if you have room in the garage for one bike, this kind of starts answering those questions because you have wind protection and the sportiness of some of their other motorcycles baked in. Now, not to the necessarily same degree, not track riding for sure, but definitely in that realm. Now, speaking on the ergonomics, of course, I mentioned that we have a 32.87 inch seat height. You're sitting at a very neutral way. It's just your casual upright riding position. Of course, we do have an adjustable windscreen right here, done up with your hands. It is nice. Triumph provided that feature because some manufacturers don't. Suzuki. Wind protection is quite good. I stand at 5'10" tall. In the uppermost position, wind just kind of goes right over my head, right at the top of my helmet. In the lower position, kind of hits about right here, but I didn't really experience any buffeting. You have a decent sized handlebar, good stuff there in terms of your just overall ergonomics. But the ergonomics is something that's super important to kind of hammer down on here because it's an all-arounder bike. You need that comfort, you need the accessibility, and this is something that you can ride around in town and enjoy that. Now, the last thing I kind of want to talk about is the brakes. We do see the J1 4-piston calipers come into play, 310mm rotors, and this axial master cylinder. I would like to see a radial master cylinder to get some better feel, but overall, there are very, very few complaints here, save for a little bit overzealous wheelie control. Now, we talked about this $12,495 motorcycle. Go ahead and check out Motorcycle.com for the full story, the specs, and much, much more. I'm Nick with Motorcycle.com. If you guys have any questions, drop them down below. We'll get you some answers. Now, take care.